office worker reincarnated in a new world with a cheat skill and becomes the strongest S-rank healer. Lucille was a salaryman and successfully closes a deal, fulfilling his monthly quota. He confidently walks home when a person gets out of the police station. That person stabbed a cop and is now on the run with a gun. The officer pins the criminal to the ground, but the criminal tries to resist and shoots. The bullet hits Lucille's chest. He face plants the ground. He starts losing tons of blood, but God felt sorry for him, so God decided to reincarnate him in the world of Galdardia, where magic and monsters exist. Lucille suddenly hears a roar and falls out of fear. When he looks up, he sees a huge dragon flying by. God advises him to open his status window if he wants to survive. Lucille finds the screen displaying his name and age. God gives him 1 hour to pick up the job and skills he wants. Lucille chooses Assess Mastery to improve his skill development, Martial Arts for self-defense, Magic Control due to its intriguing potential, and Monster Luck to increase his luck. He then decides that his job will be a healer with a specialization in holy magic, granting him access to recovery spells. But he doesn't have the courage to face monsters. He had 3 silver coins with him, and since he's 15, an adult in this world, he needs to find a job. Following a well-defined road, he arrives at the grand entrance of the town. The guards ask for his ID. He tells a story about being a healer from a small village who was expelled and seeks work at the local healing clinic. The guard is surprised and consults someone inside the town. The guard returns with a woman named Lumina, who questions Lucille about his identity. Lucille explains he needs a job and is invited to follow Lumina to the Healers Guild. Lucille hurries into the town. However, he accidentally collides with a man named Bazin and apologizes. But Bazin starts getting aggressive after finding out that Lucille is a healer. But since Lucille doesn't know how to use magic, Bazin tells him to be an honest healer. Lumina returns to his side, and it continues guiding Lucille to the guild. Lucille asks Lumina about the toll exemption. She explains that healers don't pay because they save lives. Lucille ponders if his monster luck skill influenced his special treatment. They finally arrive at the Healers Guild, where Lumina warmly welcomes him inside. The receptionist, Kiraru, asks him to fill out the form so he can register as a guild healer. As he fills out the form, Lucille notices Kiraru's respect towards Lumina, making him think that she's important. He hands her the completed form. Kiraru gives Lucille an identification card and instructs him to infuse it with his magical energy. Lucille uses his magic control skill to do so, revealing his name and rank on the card. Kiraru records the information in the guild's magical network, which will allow him to use it in any healer's guild in the world. Since everything is done, Lumina decides to leave. However, Lucille realizes a problem. He doesn't know any holy element spells. Lumina is initially skeptically scary and demands an explanation. He explains that his village had no spell tomes, and he was the first healer there. I mean, at this point everyone is buying his BS. He then asks if he can become an apprentice at a clinic to learn basic healer stuff. Lumina gives him 3 options. Spartan training, where he intensively studies and recites spells to replenish his magic and eventually learn a healing spell. He gets a loan to attend magic school for 3 years and repay the guild later, or working as an assistant at a clinic while studying magic in his free time. Lucille considers all options. Spartan training is the best because he's already used to it from his previous life. Plus, his Assess Mastery skill tells him how much experience he needs to improve his skills. He chooses that one, impressing Kiraru. Yeah, she thinks he's stupid as hell. She takes charge of his training and tells him to follow her to his room. Before parting away with Lumina, Lucille thanks her and tells he will repay her someday. She wishes him good luck with a smiley face, which literally melts and motivates his virgin heart. Lucille is assigned to a windowless room. There, he must study the spell tome and practice until his body cannot handle it anymore. Lucille sets a goal to learn healing within 10 days and starts reading the tome. He decides to imagine a wounded arm being slowly healed. He starts his chant, and a small light circle appears. He felt nothing happened, so he tears up. Lucille finds his holy magic stats have increased by 5, and that his mana decreased by 5. Pushing his limits, Lucille practices 9 times until his mana reaches 1. But he realizes that having no mana leaves him feeling hangover effects. Since then, he decided to divide his learning into parts. First, he casts magic until his mana is low, and then he will practice his mana control while his mana is recovering. He keeps repeating the process several times a day, and his stat windows prove that he's quickly improving. During his training, Monica, a new cutie, delivers his meal. Lucille gets charmed and thanks her. On the 3rd day, he finally sees his heal spell in action and talks to Monica. She uses his guild card to confirm it and congratulates him. He gives her his biggest Chad smile until she asks him to pay 1 silver coin. He pays and asks if he should look for Lumina to give him guidance. Turns out Monica didn't know he was the one that Lumina brought. So, he gets his money back because Lumina already paid for his room for 10 days. Monica reveals that Lumina is the captain of the church's all-female paladin regiment. He asks Monica if he can make money by healing people, and she told him that yes, and 1 silver coin would be a respectable price. He thinks it's too much, but she explains how he must monthly annual fees according to his rank. On his way, he ends up meeting Bazin, the beast man who intimidated him. And once again, Lucille apologizes for absolutely no reason. What a dumb stick. Lucille wants to ask him about the Adventurers Guild, but he doesn't get a chance because 4 other injured beast men interrupt them. Bazin tries to check on them, scolding them that they should be careful about their missions. Worried about the heavy injuries, explaining they cannot go to a healer clinic. Lucille frozen in place, remembering what Monica told him. Turns out that healers are extorting everyone, and the guild cannot do something about it because of their methods. Lucille promised that he won't be an evil corrupt healer and decides to help. He says that he will heal them. The beastmen take him to an alleyway, where Lucille uses his healing chant to heal the girl, but the spell somehow fails despite consuming his mana. Bazin asks what Lucille is doing. He apologizes because it's his first time healing someone. He tries to focus as the girl gets weaker and chants the spell again. The spell finally works, and the girl is now cured. He quickly heals 2 more despite failing to keep his concentration and failing the spell several times. He starts walking toward the last injured but ends up falling. He wakes up in his room in the Healers Guild and regrets not being able to save the last one. The Bazin still thanked him for saving the rest, but he still blamed himself. He then gets determined to level up as a healer and decides to build experience at the Adventurers Guild, where he can also learn skills to survive in this world. He heads out to the Adventurers Guild and gets impressed by how massive it looks. He approaches the main desk and tells the secretary that he wants to register as an adventurer. He gets fascinated when the secretary turns around, revealing to be a beautiful bunny girl. She welcomes him and tells him to fill out the form, then he must channel his blood or magic into a card. He fills it out. She proceeds to explain how adventurer contracts work. In short, an adventurer fulfills requests and gets compensation for it, but the guild will keep 10% of their compensation to cover operating expenses. She tells him that he will start out with the lowest adventurer rank, which is H. Lucille gets curious and asks if there are requests for healing. The girl gets surprisingly confused and he then explains that he's a healer. He asks if he can get money by healing injured adventurers and then use that money to pay for his training fees. The girl doesn't understand, but Lucille asks if she can introduce him to someone who can train him to improve his martial arts skill, but she cannot make the final decision and tells him she will be back. The cute bunny girl returns a few minutes later with a big scary dude behind her. Lucille explains to the big guy that he wants to train his fighting and will pay for it by healing the injured. The big guy thinks this is a strange deal for a healer and asks why a healer like Lucille wants to learn how to fight. Lucille explains that he will be killed by a weak monster if he goes out on a journey, so he wants to be strong and able to protect himself. The big guy decides to accept Lucille's healing services in exchange for training. Lucille will be paid 1 silver coin per day for healing people, and the big guy will deduct his training fees from his wage. Lucille accepts it and tells that he can start the job in 6 days. The big guy tells the bunny secretary named Nana to take care of Lucille from now on. She introduces herself with a big smile, attracting dangerous stares at Lucille from the adventurers around. The big guy introduces himself as Braun, the guild's chief instructor. He tells Lucille that he will be waiting for him in 6 days, and walks away with his evil laugh. Lucille returns to his room in the Healers Guild and thinks for the next 6 days, he will use all his energy to improve and make sure he won't fail when healing people. Monica then knocks on his door to bring his dinner and congratulates him for finding a new goal. She motivates him, and he asks her which skill level he should aim for with his holy magic affinity. Monica explains that if he reaches level 5 before he turns 20, he will be considered talented. Monica tries her best to motivate him and tells him that if manages to do it, she will go on a date with him. His eyes get on fire. This was the motivation he needed to work hard. He spends the next 6 days in his room, doing everything he can to improve his magic. On the 6th day, he headed down and thanked Kiruru for all the help she provided to him. Kiruru thinks he's quite impressive, not only for learning fast but also for having found a job. She tries to motivate him and reminds him to thank Lumina for her help if he runs into her. He says his goodbye and heads out to the Adventurers Guild. Upon stepping inside, he feels people staring at him and commenting. He meets another hella cute secretary at the front desk who tries to help him. He introduces himself and tells he asked Broad to train him. She points him out to the staircase leading to the underground training hall. He follows her instructions and ends up in a huge space. Broad then appears and looks even scarier than before. Broad tells him to run some laps. Lucille realizes Broad is the type of person who only believes in hard work, and to make it worse, he's criticizing every single movement he does. Yet, despite the training being harsh and him being bullied, Lucille starts to enjoy this treatment. After some cringe and weird moments, he finally collapses. Broad is impressed to see a newbie pass out during the warm-up. After some rest, they continue. The adventurers heard a scream. Yep, Broad was sitting on top of Lucille during the stretching exercises. Broad explains stretching can improve his range of motion and his range of attack. Plus, he can help him dodge the enemies. After the intense stretching session, Broad tells Lucille to try to land an attack on him. Lucille tries to land his baby kick, shocking Broad, who can't believe how weak he is. Lucille reveals he is level 1, and that's why he wanted to train. Despite being still shocked, he's impressed that Lucille keeps motivated. Lucille reveals he wants to reach a level where he can face adventurers without wetting his pants. Broad thinks this is a good goal and tells Lucille to come at him with everything. But Lucille's attacks are both weak and slow. Broad easily dodges and slaps his face. Broad motivates him, mentioning that the real fight begins when he's tired. He recommends that Lucille learn how to move, and to do that, he needs to visualize his attack to prevent him from getting sloppy. He tries to follow Broad's instructions, imagining before attacking. He realizes that he needs to use his range to get close and then land a strike. He tries to kick but gets knocked down when Broad counters. He finds this training almost too much to handle and thinks about quitting. But he gets up, determined to survive in this new fresh start world. Broad is impressed by his determination and smiles. Lucille sets another goal. Someday, he will land a hit on Broad, who, by the way, spoiler alert, he is like level 250. After an intense session, Lucille ends up exhausted on the floor. Broad compliments him for having guts and tells him that the most important thing in battle is not dying or getting injured. Broad tells him to first watch and learn, and then Lucille can practice it on Broad, because if he doesn't know what he's doing, he will end up hurt or dead. Lucille realizes this is pretty much learning from experience, as he did as an office worker in his previous life. Broad decides to call it for a day. Lucille then thinks about casting heal on himself to recover from the injuries and fatigue. But Broad tells Lucille to only heal himself if he's really injured. Lucille understands it and notices that they were the only ones training over there. Broad mentions that it's because they have a few newbie adventurers, plus they don't have the money to train. So, they use real battles to improve. Lucille remembers that was the case with the beast men he tried to heal a week ago. Plus, he doesn't know if his healing skills will help him recover right now, so he wants to save his mana to save adventurers instead. Broad is impressed by those words and tells Lucille to promise that he will heal anyone who needs it, regardless of their race. Suddenly, a few injured adventurers appear in the training hall. One of them asks if Lucille will really heal them for free. The injured girl wants to go back, thinking this is just a scam. But Lucille checks the girl's injuries and prepares to heal her. She cannot believe he will do it, but he starts chanting his spell. The girl doesn't believe that a healer just helped her, making Lucille realize that people don't trust healers in their town. He heals the remaining party members, and Broad tells him that he will soon become busy healing the injured adventurers. Lucille then explains that right now, he can only use his healing skill 8 times in a row and asks if that's enough. Broad thinks that's enough but recommends Lucille to practice his healing skill until he's almost out of energy. That way, his body will naturally adapt and become stronger. Lucille decides to trust him but is shocked to find out that the real training hasn't started yet. He still needs to build his strength. He decides on his new training method. First, he will train his martial arts skills, then he will heal people to improve his holy magic affinity, and finally meditate to increase his magic and physical recovery. He realizes that staying around Broad will give him great results. Broad, on the other hand, tells Lucille that he should live at the guild to make his training more progressive. He will get a room for free and 3 meals a day. Broad explains that he wants to keep Lucille's healing skills around to increase the survival rate of inexperienced adventurer. He tries to negotiate a monthly renewal contract and Bro agrees because he wants to show Lucille how much he's needed. He plans to use the first month to shape Lucille, then start the real training. Lucille thanks Monster Luck Sensei because he will not only train his martial arts, but will also get a room, clothes, and a job. Lucille goes outside to take a shower. Broad gives him a new change of clothes and tells him to hurry up and go to the cafeteria. Nana appears to thank him for healing the adventurers and tells him she will wash the clothes for him. He tries to refuse it, but she assumes that he doesn't want a beast folk to teach his clothes. He clears the misunderstanding, mentioning he doesn't want a beautiful girl washing his dirty clothes. She reacts in a shy manner and takes the clothes from his hands, telling him she will bring them tomorrow. He heads inside and notices Broad sitting in front of a huge feast. He doesn't understand why there's so much food. But Broad replies that Lucille must eat everything and then come downstairs. Everything is so delicious that he finishes the whole feast and goes to Broad, who takes him to his room. He tells him to rest for today. Lucille jumps onto the bed, but he thinks he could use this time to practice his healing magic, just like he did on the Healers Guild, and improve his mastery. He trains his magic and meditates for 3 hours until he finally gets sleepy. The next day, Broad introduces him to Gulgar the guild cook and gives him a strange drink. He mentions that it was created by the Sage of Time. It will taste like a garbage can thrown up in his mouth, but it will make it easier to increase his muscles, stamina, and reaction time. Its name is Substance X, but the only problem is that nobody wants to drink it to get stronger. Lucille decides to eat and decides to drink it because it will make him stronger. It not only tastes bad, but it also smells awful. He wants to spit it out, so he decides to drink it in one gulp. Suddenly, he starts feeling like his body is overflowing with energy. Gulgar cannot believe Lucille just drank it and tells him to eat the meat and join Broad. A week of training quickly passes by, but Lucille still cannot land a hit on Broad. Broad goes harder on him, launching several punches. He tells Lucille to think while defending because each strike has a purpose. His goal is to focus on watching, thinking, and learning as his life depends on it. Lucille takes a massive punch and realizes that Broad's abusive advice ends up motivating him. He knows that he's still a beginner and asks Broad to try again. Broad is taken aback because Lucille is smiling like a freak, but Lucille replies he will at least hit him once. Broad gets all hyped up, preparing to go all in, but they're interrupted. A cat girl appears, mentioning she's here to be healed. She tells him that she was bitten on the back by a were-rat. Lucille checks the wounds and says that he can close her wound with his magic, but she could be infected. In that case, she should visit a doctor. He heals her, but he notices the cat girl tearing up. He thinks he did something wrong when the girl's party leader asks for his name. The guy asks if Lucille also heals beast folks, but Lucille is confused. He doesn't care about race because both are his patients. The party leader says that Lucille is a good guy and asks if they can come back in the future. Lucille tells them they can, and the cat girl thanks him by hugging him. A month quickly passed by, and Lucille noticed people started to speak to him more often. His training became different, and now he's been working on his throwing skills. Over the course of the last month, his daily Substance X cups became bigger, and more people requested his healing services. Since it's the last day of the contract, Lucille thanks Broad for helping him for the whole month. He mentions that he will return to the Healers Guild to find work. Lucille explains that he needs to pay for his Healer Guild fees to continue being a healer. Broad then pulls out a bag of coins and gives it to him. He says it's Lucille's reward for training for a whole month, plus saving adventurers' lives. Lucille ends up accepting it and heads out to pay his fees. The adventurers, hearing the conversation, tell him they will be waiting for him to come back. Lucille starts to tear down and promises that he will return. He goes to the Healers Guild and pays the fees for a whole year. He then returns to the Adventurers Guild, where he sees Broad welcoming him back and drags him down to the training hall, mentioning they don't need to worry about the contract. He eats another feast after training and thinks that the intensity was higher than usual. He's then approached by Broad, who gives him a book. Lucille realizes it's a low-level holy magic tome. Broad says it's their treat for him for coming home in time. Lucille thinks they're treating him like a kid, but Broad explains that healers need a healing spell and a detoxification one. Once he can use both, then Lucille can be called a real healer. Lucille realizes that they're helping him so much and promises that he will train harder from now on. Gulgar appears with more disgusting Substance X and tells him to prepare himself. Broad and Gulgar cannot believe how Lucille gulps it in one go, but Lucille promises himself that he will knock down Broad within a year as revenge for making him drink it. After some intense training, Broad decides to give Lucille a day off to rest. Lucille is confused, but he realizes that he didn't have one yet. But the worst part is that he doesn't have anything else to do. Brod says that if he's free, he can help butcher up some monsters. Lucille decides to give it a try since he will get a closer look at monsters and get experience. He knocks on the door next to the cafeteria where he meets Galba. Lucille realizes he's Gulger's older brother. Galba first demonstrates the butchering and impresses Lucille when he pulls a huge boar from a small bag. He quickly removes the skin and butchers the animal into meat parts. Lucille thinks it was quick and Galba explains he has done it hundreds of times. Galba explains that Brod sent Lucille here to learn about monsters, especially to find out their weak points, and thinks of ways to deal with them. Galba explains it will help Lucille survive when he goes out on his adventures as a healer. He mentions that newbies don't care about preparing themselves like Lucille wants, but Lucille says he just doesn't want to randomly die. Galba replies that all adventurers don't want to die, but they think of themselves as heroes. So, they end up rushing into battle and dying because they're dumb. Lucille feels bad, but Galba explains the death rate among new adventurers reduced after Lucille came there. So in the end, those reckless wannabe heroes end up learning the lesson after getting seriously injured and saved. 3 days later, Lucille is granted another day off, but the problem remains the same. He doesn't know what to do. His magic training has been going at a slower rate lately, making him realize that once it levels up, it becomes harder to reach the next level. He wonders if Brod is busy or something when suddenly, Nana and Melina suddenly grab his hands. He doesn't understand what's going on until Murnell states that Brod had asked them to help him study. But he's more worried about getting killed by other adventurers if they see him with the girls. They take him to the guild's library, where the girls show him several types of books. He decides to start with Murnell's books about countries. The girls get up and leave, while Nana stays to teach him the basics, as Brod had requested. Lucille is confused when they tell him they didn't expect him to pick the most useful information. Nana explains Brod only asked her to teach him, but the other girls got curious to find what Lucille is interested in. They open a book with a map, and Nana explains the world depicted on it. The Republic of St. Shirul, their current location, is governed by the church, which also oversees the Healers Guild. She also mentions their country is the only one in the world that abolished slavery. Lucille is confused and glad that he got here. Nana also introduces the independent city-state of Yenis, a beast folk country. 6 months pass. One day, while checking the guild's earning ranking, they notice the lineage of the White Wolf topping the rank again. They speculate that the party group might soon reach rank A, but their conversation is cut short when they squish Lucille with their bodies. He asks for some space, but they just get closer while telling him they're just bonding. Nana comes to save him, but Melina notices something. Lucille's clothes barely fit him. Our boy is becoming a ripped Chad. Nana ends up going out with him to help him buy some new clothes. On their way back, they hear a scream. Lucille hands his bag to Nana and rushes to find Monica lying in a pool of her own blood. Lucille quickly brings Monica to the Adventurers Guild, patiently waiting for her to regain consciousness. When she wakes up, he explains that he heard her scream and found her covered in blood. He tried to heal her, but since the wound was poisoned, the heal spell didn't work, so he used the cure spell which successfully saved her. Monica suggests the attack might have been attempted murder, with Nana suggesting it to be the work of some mercenaries. Lucille asks who has the money to pay for them. Monica replies healers do. Monica reveals a story about her friend being forced into slavery after being unable to afford to pay the bill at the healing clinic. Lucille is confused because slavery is illegal. Monica explains it's only illegal in their country, not in the others. She had publicly objected to this, making revenge a possible motive for the attack. Monica suspects Badacully, who runs the city's largest healing clinic. The idea that Badacully may be associated with the Healers Guild worries Lucille, fearing returning to the guild might put Monica in danger. He asks Nana's permission for Monica to stay at the Adventurers Guild, which she agrees to. In the evening, Lucille feels grateful for saving Monica's life and promises to work harder to improve himself. A month later, the man responsible for the attack is caught, but no direct link to Badacully is found. Despite this, Monica decides to work at the Adventurers Guild, where she finds kindness and acceptance. Over time, Lucille's stats improve significantly, and he feels proud of his progress after a year in this new world. He talks to Bord about his feelings of not making enough progress, but Bord reassures him that improvement takes time and believes in Lucille's potential. Lucille expresses his gratitude for Bord's support, and reveals his plans to save money to buy new grimoires for learning more spells. He wants to work outside the town but intends to return to the guild for training and healing jobs at a reasonable fee. Lucille dreams of opening an affordable clinic for everyone and shares this ambition with Bord, who is impressed with his determination. Bord encourages Lucille and shakes his hand, expressing his belief in Lucille's ability to achieve his dreams. Thankful for Bord's support, Lucille sets off for the Healers Guild. Lucille was surprised to find an exhausted Kyoru there. She mentions that working has become tough since he took Monica to join the Adventurers Guild. Lucille looks around confused, because the only hard work she's doing right now is breathing and complaining. He then gave her his card to renew his membership. Kyoru then asks if she should raise his healer rank to C, since he managed to get the required skill level. She explains that his tax will become more expensive, but he will be able to buy the spell tome for Cute at rank F. At rank E he can get middle heal, rank D gets him the barrier, but at rank C he can learn area healing. Lucille was curious and asked how much the grimoires are. Kyoru informed him it only costs 90 pieces of silver. Lucille checked his pocket and only had 3 silver coins to his name. He realized that he needs to find a job that pays well. Suddenly, Brod appears behind Lucille and drops a bag of money on the counter. He asks if the Healer Guild can loan Lucille to the Adventurers Guild for a year for 1 gold coin, with the guild covering his wages. Lucille is initially startled and asks what Brod is doing there. Brod explains he forgot to give him his payment of 2 gold and 31 silver coins, and then asks him to be a regular resident of the Adventurers Guild. Lucille ends up accepting the request, mentioning he hasn't managed to hit Brod yet, and that he'd love to work for the guild if he's being paid. Kyoru worriedly whispers if he's sure about his decision, but Lucille explains that Brod is his instructor, and that he's a trustworthy person. She then accepts the request and wishes him good luck. Lucille then buys some spell tomes and returns to his room in the Adventurers Guild. He decides on a new goal. For the next year, he will learn as much magic as he can. As Lucille and Bord headed towards dinner, he was taken aback to discover a warm reception awaiting him. The adventurers had gathered, clapping and cheering to welcome him back. Bord happily informed him that it was a welcome party since he now is a temporary employee of the guild. Amid the festivities, Golger gave Lucille some Substance X. The smell made everyone take a step back from him. Lucille raises his glass to make a toast to the adventurers who accepted and helped him all this time. He also tells them to come back alive from their missions and wishes to work with them for another year. He then chugs down his glass, shocking everyone, who cannot believe he's willing to drink it. While Lucille was eating his meal, Bazin comes with his group, mentioning that he smells. Bazin then asks a question that shocks Lucille. He asks if he's into dudes, but he has a good reason to. Lucille spends some time with the receptionist girls, but he never made a move on them. Lucille says that Brod would kill him if he did. He explained that he focused on training to increase his chances of survival, so he didn't have time to get a girl. But Sekhiroth then brings up the old topic and asks if Lucille is really into girls, and asks if he wants to go out for a bit of adult fun. Lucille gets excited. He didn't know there was such a place in town. Suddenly, Monica interrupts them by calling Lucille's name. Lucille is afraid that she heard their conversation, but she asks about the Healers Guild. He replied that Kyoru seemed bored, and asks if Monica is enjoying her stay in the Adventurers Guild. She says that she loves it because she can see her savior, him. The situation between the two gets tense as the two blush and Lucille finally starts making a move on a girl. However, they stop when they realize the boys are watching them. The next day, Lucille is resting from his training when he hears Nana telling Botticully that he cannot enter the training grounds. Botticully then asks Lucille if he's the healer living in this guild. He replies with yes, and Botticully calls him an impudent brat. Lucille asks who he is, and Botticully introduces himself and his clinic. He doesn't recognize the name at first, until he realizes that it's the same guy who tried to assassinate Monica. The old man then arrogantly orders Lucille to quit working at the guild and work at his clinic, but he is refused. The guy gets angry. Lucille then asks why should he even work for him. Botticully angrily answers that people stopped going to his clinic since Lucille started working at the guild. Lucille then mentions that people don't want to go to a place with a bad reputation. Botticully continues to argue back, and Lucille mentions several situations to ask him what kind of spell he would use. Surprisingly, Botticully only uses high heal and charges 30 pieces of gold. Lucille then asks what would happen if the patient couldn't pay that value. Botticully replies that's a trade secret. Lucille then exposes that Botticully is selling the patients to other countries. Botticully explodes at that moment and orders his men to kill Lucille. They unsheathe their weapons, but Brod suddenly appears and restrains them. He then threatens to investigate Botticully's business, making the old man run away in fear. Lucille thanked Brod for saving him, but his instructor was surprised that the biggest healer in town was interested in Lucille. A few days later, Brod tells Lucille that some troublemakers have been asking about him. But Lucille dismisses it because he's been here for over a year and didn't do anything shady. Broad then makes him worry by saying that they might target him to gain Botticelli's favor. With the current situation, Broad decides to change Lucille's training focus from healing to the same used to a Spartan regime. With this new training regime, Lucille takes the normal daily beating. He never gives up, but it's the same as my life, useless. The adventurers cannot even believe how can he survive and get up. And in that moment, Lucille gets a new nickname, the Healer Maso Zombie. Everyone calls him that, but he is annoyed by that. Broad asks if he can use a barrier spell. Lucille confirms and Broad tells him to use it. In the next second, Broad grabs and throws him to the ground. He's pretty impressed because Lucille didn't get injured or died from it. Lucille is confused and Broad explains he will need to use it because his training will become more painful. Lucille will learn how to use a sword and shield. Broad explains that he spent the last year building Lucille's physical foundations. He's not the most talented person, but he's at least hardworking. So, he'd like to make Lucille his apprentice. Lucille is initially confused but accepts Broad as his master. Broad then forbids him from checking his status and skill levels from now on. That was what motivated Lucille for this whole time. But Broad explains that numbers will make him lose focus on what truly means to become powerful. He explains that Lucille can have high stats, but if he loses his head, he's dead. Lucille accepts the orders and Broad tells him to activate his barrier because the real training is about to start. He teaches him a way to see the fight between the two from another perspective and Lucille prepares himself. He trusts Broad no matter what, and decides that instead of running from his master, he will land a blow and rushes forward. Since that day, he spent 6 days per week training, 1 day per weapon type to learn as many skills as possible. Meanwhile, Botticelli receives another report about Lucille's healing costs. He's mad because Lucille only requests 1 silver coin per healing spell, which will drive him out of business. So, he decides to write a letter to the head of the Healers Guild, mentioning that Lucille is charging absurd prices and requesting him to be transferred. 6 more months passed, and Lucille endured plenty. One ordinary breakfast, someone noticed his great shape. On the streets, nobody thought he was a healer. Broad said healers skip strength and defense training, making them easy to beat. Lucille thanked Gulger and said he's conquering his sword fear. The chef had no clue. Lucille explained he got cut trying to predict Broad's attacks. Too many mistakes made him dread swords, though he didn't complain. Gulger got horrified. Lucille was casually talking about disturbing stuff. He called Lucille a demon master and masochistic zombie. Broad felt slightly offended. He considered himself a kind master. They asked if he was serious. He genuinely believed he was. News broke. A letter arrived for Lucille. Nana called him Kun, making Gulger curious. He asked if something was up between them. They were just friends. Kun was due to their long friendship and same age. Broad cut in, asking who sent the letter. When they checked the sender, Lucille got surprised. It was Pope from the Holy Church of Shirul. The letter said Lucille's awesome skills and reaching level 5 of Sacred Affinity got him transferred to the church's headquarters. It was because of all the good comments about saving lives, thanks to the Adventurers Guild contract. The move was set for the 6th month this year when the contract ended. Broad said he didn't expect Botticelli to do this. Lucille didn't get it, so his master explained the old man didn't want to fight him and sent him away after knowing the Adventurers Guild protected him. The silver lining was they had half a year left for Spartan training and healing adventurers, keeping the old man from making money. They both agreed, but when it was time to heal adventurers at the guild, Lucille got overwhelmed. The long line of patients waited. The cat girl checked if he was alive, and Gulger arrived with an elixir to revive him. Lucille didn't want to but had to drink it. The cat girl said his nickname suited him well. Broad enjoyed a drink, and Gulger asked why he looked so young and strong. Broad reached level 7 in martial arts, improving his physique. Gulger was surprised someone at rank S could get stronger. They used to call Broad Tornado, even though he was retired now. Gulger said he could have reached rank SS if he retired later, but Broad didn't care. Numbers were just numbers. Changing the topic, Gulger noticed Lucille had been drinking the elixir for a long time. Ancient texts said the drink could make you strong, but nobody proved it. So, Lucille might have been drinking it for no reason. Gulger asked if it helped, but Lucille wasn't sure. All they knew was he wasn't the same as when he came to the guild. They decided not to tell Lucille and let him keep drinking it. They laughed about how the girls always ran away when Lucille drank the elixir. Then, Galba arrived, and Gulger had a beer ready. Broad asked if negotiations went well, and Galba said they did. Nobody would attack Lucille when they left the guild. Botticelli arranged their transfer to the church, as Broad suspected. Broad asked what they'd do now. Galba said the Guild of Healers boss was making good money, and it was time someone stopped him. Rod was surprised. He didn't expect Galba to be involved in anything after retiring. But for Galba, it was cleaner and calmer than being an adventurer. He saw how hard Lucille tried and wanted to help someone with such spirit. Gulger asked how much Lucille could improve in 6 months. Rod said it wasn't certain. He was still level 1 and could only fight rank E soldiers. If lucky, maybe he could beat a rank D. Gulger suggested his brother train him, but Galba said only if Lucille didn't change. Rod preferred not to train him. He might kill him in the first lesson. Feeling the tension, Gulger switched topics, asking if they thought Lucille was old enough for a partner. Galba thought he'd find one easily since the receptionists liked him, even if they treated him like a younger brother. Gulger explained it might be tough because Lucille's nickname as a masochistic zombie was getting famous. Galba shared a funny detail from when he worked with Lucille. He liked sweet, smiling girls, basically blondes. They felt sorry for Lucille. He might have some heartbreak ahead. 6 months passed, and it was time for Lucille to leave the guild. He told Brod he's now a rank A healer. Brod congratulated him, asking if he'd really go to the Holy City. Lucille said yes, his priority was survival and obeying the Pope. But if there's corruption, he'll escape and return. Lucille asked why Brod called him to the training room. Lucille wanted a favor. She tried to save lives for 2 years and didn't want clinics taking advantage of adventurers. She wanted Brod to create a course for newbies, teaching them fighting, butchering, and herbs. Others could teach. The point was to help newcomers learn without experiencing it firsthand, like Brod helped him. Brod wondered why he should do this. Everyone's responsible for themselves. Lucille said thanks to Brod, he got stronger, and this could reduce deaths in clinic patients. Brod was surprised but understood Lucille's heart was with adventurers. He wanted to save their lives affordably and didn't mind hurting clinics. Brod asked if his training helped. Lucille said yes, even though he couldn't improve more. Brod scared him, then asked about Monica. Lucille suggests Monica should keep working with them, but it's her choice. He thought they'd talked about it as good friends. Lucille thinks Monica probably discussed it with Nana. Brod asks the girls to stop hiding and thanks them for their help. Nana says they should also thank him. They want to help Lucille in the future. Lucille wants to thank them too. They say if it weren't for her, he'd have run from training, and if not for Monica, he'd have escaped from Broadmoor. She thought she was a bother, but Lucille says she was his anchor in training. He wants to meet them for a meal someday. The next morning, Lucille tells Brod he'll beat him someday. Brod promises to do anything if he succeeds. Lucille plans to make him drink 5 jars of elixir, but they have to say goodbye. Brod gives Lucille a magical bag to hold 10 items, making Lucille tear up. Lucille wasn't alone on his new adventure. Bazin and his group joined him. They went to the Adventurers Guild in Shirul, but Lucille felt nervous about being mocked, so he brought his friends. The guild was much like the previous one. Bazin acted like a dad taking his child to school, and spoke to the receptionist to find the guild master for Lucille. While waiting, Bazin advised Lucille not to judge by appearances. The boss arrived, courteous compared to the others. Lucille introduced himself as a healer, which got everyone's attention. Fortunately, Bazin made the boss recognize him as Brat's apprentice and left. The boss asked why Lucille came, and his answer shocked everyone. He wanted a jar of elixir. They offered one for free to see if he'd actually drink it, and if he did, they'd sell him more. People were disgusted, but Lucille went along. After leaving everyone shocked, they ordered elixir and confirmed it could heal for a simple silver coin. The group's real goal was to leave Lucille at the central church. They said heartfelt goodbyes. Lucille felt a bit lonely, but it meant a new beginning. He couldn't remember why he came to the church but introduced himself to the receptionists and asked to speak with the person in charge. He met Granhart, who claimed to have summoned him. They used a magic-powered elevator for security. Lucille met Lumina, and they recognized each other despite not seeing each other for years. Lumina didn't remember his name but recognized his pure aura. She invited him to visit later. Afterward, a priest took him to a room that looked like they might torture him, but they went further inside for an interrogation. Granhart was surprised by a letter from the Meritoni office, claiming Lucille's treatments harmed other healers' profits. He wanted to know if it was true. Feeling a bit too tense, Lucille tried to calm down by thinking of how he felt when he got a promotion at work. He admitted that what the letter said was partly true but explained all the money and morale problems he had with other healers. He left out the issue of trafficking because he wanted to focus on proposing transparent costs for patients' safety. Granhart told him to discuss this with other priests and talk to the archbishop. When they finished, Lucille asked about his new job. He would be in the spiritual cleansing unit of the Shirul Church, a deacon and an exorcist. Lucille didn't quite understand, so Granhart clarified he'd be doing exorcisms in a specific place, earning 20 gold coins per month. This shocked Lucille. He visited Lumina in her room, they had tea, and talked about recent years. He explained he got a letter from the Pope for the transfer. Lumina asked what he'd do next. When he mentioned exorcisms, she got worried and explained the dangerous job. Under the old guild building, there was a labyrinth-turned-cemetery with monsters and treasures. Lucille knew about it, impressing Lumina with his knowledge. His job was to prevent monsters from escaping and deal with ghostly creatures, skeletons, and zombies using sacred purification spells. He could keep what he found, including magical stones for high-level magic books. Lucille was excited but worried about zombies. Lumina reassured him, saying nobody turned into a zombie in their world. But there were still problems like the repugnant smell. But this wasn't a problem for Lucille because he'd experienced something similar before. They said their goodbyes, and Lucille had a clearer understanding of why they sent him here and what he had to do. He was determined to give his all, just like when he was reincarnated in Meritoni. On his first official day of work, a priest named George greeted Lucille along with Granhart. They introduced themselves politely. Granhart interrupted to give Lucille his healer and knight attire, which was only for rank or higher and cost 10 platinum coins, a whopping 1 billion. Granhart also gave him a card for the elevator. Lucille had to promise not to let anyone in under any circumstances and was magically bound by an oath. Breaking it meant losing the card and facing punishment. Granhart left Lucille with George, who told him to wear the expensive clothes before entering the labyrinth. It smelled terrible inside, worse than the elixir. They encountered the first zombie, and George showed Lucille a lengthy purification spell. Lucille realized this would be his job from now on. He complained about not knowing the spell, but George said he would have learned it. George couldn't handle the smell and left Lucille alone. Lucille decided to test the items his master left him, starting with a beautiful sword. Since there were no zombies around, he began to draw a map to avoid getting lost. Lucille ran into a horde of zombies, which startled him. He started praying to saints, but remembered it didn't work in this world. He recited the long purification spell, and it worked, calming him. He felt relieved for defeating them, but there was no level up. Lucille thought maybe it was just a training ground, and he could earn money while training. He had an idea to use the purification spell on his sword and practice swordsmanship on the zombies. It seemed like a great solution, and the zombies didn't fight back, making it straightforward training. He even tried to cure a zombie with the healing spell, but it didn't work. The labyrinth had different floors. After warming up on the first floor, he went to the second and encountered a will-o'-the-wisp. He ate sandwiches and drank the elixir. The zombies didn't come near him because the elixir masked his scent. Lucille explored the second level and then went down to the third, where he met a group of skeletons that scared him. Running out of magic, he concluded his first day of work. After finishing his zombie training, George takes Lucille to a shop where he can exchange the crystals he collected for points. These points work like money in this magical world, and Lucille is excited, feeling like he's in a video game. George introduces Lucille to the shopkeeper, Catalia, who compliments him for his bravery against monsters. Lucille feels flattered but realizes she's being polite to do business. He hands her the card Granhart gave him, which also works like a magical MasterCard. Catalia tells him he now has 4,216 points to spend, and Lucille is surprised. He's rich. He asks about magical books, and Catalia mentions one that costs 1,000,000 points, which is very expensive. Lucille then asks about weapons, and she says they're made by dwarves and of great quality. Lucille is drawn to a lance and asks about its price. The shopkeeper tells him it's 25 points, much cheaper than the expensive book. He plans to come back the next day to buy both a sword and a lance, but realizes he doesn't have enough points right now. However, the shopkeeper, showing her negotiation skills, offers him a discount of 4,000 points, making Lucille very lucky. While Lucille is excited about his purchase, he bumps into Granhart in the hallway. Granhart reminds him about his salary and offers equipment from the storeroom. He also gives some strange advice about brushing teeth and going to bed early before handing Lucille a uniform. The next day, Lucille feels confident with his armor, sword, and lance. He's ready to face monsters and begins drawing maps, walking, and defeating zombies on his second day. He earns 5,372 points and completes maps up to the 5th level. As the days go by, the dungeon becomes more challenging with traps and stronger enemies. Lucille becomes an expert at dealing with them and continues to advance through the floors, collecting more magic stones. While exploring, he comes across a suspiciously large door that he identifies as a boss fight room. However, he decides not to enter yet and asks George about it, who doesn't understand the concept of a boss room since there are no video games in this world. Lucille changes his question to ask if there's a room with strong monsters, and George finally understands. He's surprised that Lucille has reached this point in the dungeon so quickly. In this world, there are no traditional bosses. Instead, there are rooms with large groups of enemies. The next day, Lucille returns to the dungeon to face this group of enemies. He's well equipped with a bow and arrows, feeling both nervous and excited. When he enters the dark room, he encounters a will-o'-the-wisp and realizes there are more monsters than he expected. He tries to use a purification spell, but it fails. Lucille considers retreating but decides to fight instead. He recalls the training from Broad and focuses his energy on his sword. After a tough battle, he defeats the zombies. Then, a magical flying wraith attacks him. Lucille throws his spear and tries to shoot it with arrows, but it dodges. He notices the wraith is afraid of sacred silver. Lucille remembers that healers can't cast spells while carrying weapons, but he thinks it might be different with the undead. He waits for the wraith to cast a spell and seizes his chance to counterattack. Lucille slices the wraith's skull in two, but it can regenerate. He stabs it in the chest with his spear and decapitates it, ending the threat. With the battle won, Lucille can finally use his magic when it's not needed. He collects the loot and plans to explore the newly opened passage another day due to hunger. Exiting the dungeon, he goes to Catalia's store, surprising her with the late hour and his substantial loot. He excitedly tells her about the fight, including the magic failure and the wraith's appearance. Catalia initially thought he wouldn't share this, which annoyed her. She questions his orientation course, but Lucille defends himself, saying he's just doing his job as an exorcist. Catalia apologizes for getting angry and exchanges the magic stones for points. Lucille is amazed by his point total, but Catalia tempers his excitement. Lucille shows her the wraith's clothes, and she's impressed. She asks him to put everything in his bag and put on their uniforms. Lucille is confused but complies. They walk through a grand corridor, surprising Lucille, and arrive at an important place. Catalia talks to the Pope without needing an appointment, leaving Lucille speechless and making him wonder if Catalia is more than just a merchant. They kneel in front of the Pope, and Catalia tells him about Lucille's battle on the 10th floor. During the battle, he couldn't do any magic. The Pope, a bit surprised, looked at Catalia for confirmation. She nodded, assuring him it was true. Seeing the stuff Lucille brought from the Spectre proved he didn't use magic to beat it. The Pope, curious, asked for Lucille's name and checked out the objects. He realized they belonged to someone who disappeared 12 years ago. Not only that, but the things he got were super powerful. There was a spiritual necklace that made magic use easier, cutting it in half. Then, there was a staff called the Disruption Staff. It made magic stronger for the one who held it and could stop other people's magic. These things were really strong. The Pope wanted to buy them. Lucille thought this was a good chance to show off his negotiating skills. So, he said he didn't mind giving them up, but he figured they meant a lot to him. He asked if, in return, he could get a bigger bag. His dungeon bag filled up too fast. The Pope didn't mind and gave him a magic sack. It was like a room inside, and time didn't pass there. It was huge. Catalia got mad at Lucille for asking the Pope for stuff. Days later, after taking a break from all the chaos, Lucille began making a list of his fight mistakes against the boss. He quickly realized his mistakes couldn't fit on one page. He remembered Broad, who'd scold him for sure if he knew. And if Golgar found out, he might make him drink tons of elixir to get better or just sick. Lucille thought about training with the Paladins or Templars to get better but got hungry, so he decided to eat first. In the hallway, he bumped into Lumina, who had her two bodyguards, Quina with blue hair and Lucy, a redhead. Lucy said they were Lumina's bodyguards. Lumina had heard about Lucille's achievements in just 10 days and invited him to eat breakfast together. Lucille was excited and thanked his luck, but that didn't last long. While eating and sharing his story, Lumina and her bodyguards told him fighting a lynch was crazy. They scolded him for being reckless, saying it was a miracle he survived. Lucille asked for some mercy because everyone was scolding him for acting foolish. But when Lucy heard this, she asked about his plans, warning him he might end up dead at this rate. Lucille wanted to go back to Meritoni and train with Broad to become strong like him. Lumina said that wasn't possible because healers couldn't move unless the big boss said so. Lumina had an idea to help him, and Lucille got excited, but she told him not to get too happy. It could be tough for a healer. Lucille didn't care what they had to do. He agreed to help and felt lucky she wanted to. Later, Lucille went back to the labyrinth like always. No surprises on the 11th floor, so he went down to the 12th. He called it a day after that. After labyrinth work, he went to Catalia's store for his pay. Catalia smiled but saw he was nervous. She asked why. He said he was impressed by meeting the Pope and talking to her without even introducing himself. Lucille wondered if Catalia was a paladin or a Templar or had something churchy going on. It seemed weird she got in so easily. Catalia said some things were better not known, cause nosy folks find trouble. Lucille got scared, and for safety, he stopped asking questions. She gave him the magic bag the Pope promised and showed how it worked. Later, Lucille found out it had books inside. Catalia said the Pope gave her all the skill books. Lucille thought he'd never be this lucky again. Next day, he got to the 15th floor easy. After work, he met Lumina's Valkyries for training. Lucille introduced himself and promised not to bother them, but he worried about fighting a lady. Hearing Lumina say it was boring made Lucille stop worrying about fighting a girl. He started fearing how strong these Valkyries were. First, they had to run. Lucille thought it'd be easy cause he trained at the Adventurers Guild for 2 years, but the girls left him in the dust. Lucille realized Broad's training wasn't that great. He tried hard, but it didn't help. Half an hour later, the Valkyries were way ahead. Next up was combat training. Lumina saw Lucille's weapons and called him reckless. She wanted him to attack and show what he learned from his guild friends. This time, he used a shield and sword instead of his lance. He figured he needed to be good with both hands for a lance. Lucille attacked Lumina, but she dodged easily and even hit him in the stomach. Lucille saw he was no match, so he used magic. He remembered Broad's advice, if you can't win fair, cheat. Lucille did a spell on his sword to make it flash, trying to trick Lumina. But she was no newbie, and she dodged his attack and knocked him out with one hit. Quina and Lucy had to slap him awake later. They said Lumina usually wasn't so tough, but that didn't help cause Lucille had a tough time. Next, they did a bodyguard exercise. The defending team won cause Lucille's skills made it easier. Lumina agreed and said he's a rare case. Lucille didn't like being called rare, but Lumina said it's true. She knew a lot about him, like how he moved to the Adventurers Guild, healed for free, drank weird stuff, and got called a masochist. Lucille couldn't believe she knew all that and cursed the rumor spreaders in his head. Lucille realized it wasn't bad to be called rare cause being different is okay. Next day, he went to the labyrinth. He didn't feel tons better from yesterday's training, but Broad's words kept him going. He went to level 16 and met zombies. He used a sword and shield this time. He learned stuff from yesterday, and he could make things appear and disappear with his magic bag from the Pope. He saw a trap but stepped on it. Zombies showed up, but he wasn't scared cause he had magic and weapons. Even if they hurt him, they were just make-believe, so he used them to practice. Lucille explored more and got to level 20. He saw a door like the boss room one, but this time, he chickened out and went to Catalia's store to ask if it was dangerous. He called it the main room. He asked what might be inside, but Catalia didn't know cause she never went in the labyrinth. She looked a bit sad, hinting it might be another church person who died there. Lucille didn't believe the dungeon was real. He thought it was all an illusion. For the next 2 days, he kept training his fighting. One day, Elizabeth, a Valkyrie, woke him up. She didn't like that he was messy but said she had to teach him dual wielding. He didn't get it at first, but he went with it. When he saw they'd use real swords, he got scared. Lumina explained dual wielding, and he wished he hadn't tried it for fun. He got wrecked by a girl, and then Elizabeth beat him too. Lucille saw they were super skilled and thanked them for the beating. They trained with Lumina instead. Lucille felt ready for the boss room and won easily. He gave another thing to the Pope with Catalia. The priest this time was the friend of the one he beat a few days ago. They entered the labyrinth together 10 years ago and never came out. Lucille asked if the priest fought the church. Catalia got annoyed but answered. The Pope said the priest went against the church, the Republic of Saint Shirul, and the Healers Guild. She also said the labyrinth used to be just an underground place over 50 years ago, but for some unknown reason, it changed into what it is now. Lucille was surprised cause it sounded like she was there, which meant she's been alive for over 50 years, and she didn't look old at all. The Pope said lots of people tried to explore the labyrinth, and that's how they kept the monsters away. There's a true ending to the labyrinth, and if someone destroys the miasma core, it could stop the bad stuff. But it's just a theory cause no one did it before. Only one elite group got far but still didn't make it to the end. Lucille was scared cause they were strong with Lumina, so they should have won. But it turns out the stinky smell inside stopped them, something Lucille didn't have to worry about cause of the elixir. Because that elite team failed, they sealed the entrance. Now, only healers go inside to fight the monsters. After the story, the Pope asked Lucille if he wanted anything else. Lucille got pumped and asked for better weapons and armor to fight undead. The Pope said yes, and she promised him a promotion when he reaches rank 7 as a healer. That made him even more motivated. He'd be more important and richer. Lucille went to a bar and was polite to everyone, but they gave him funny looks. They wondered why a healer was there. People recognized him by his clothes. He asked about the dwarf from before, who remembered him. Lucille told the dwarf he ran out of elixir and needed 10 barrels of it. Everyone was surprised cause it's a lot of elixir in a short time. Since Lucille got to the city, he became kinda known but not in a good way. They saw him as a weird healer who likes getting hurt, kinda like in his old town. The bar boss asked him a favor, similar to what he did in Maritoni, healing poor adventurers. Lucille wanted to help but said he couldn't cause he worked for the church now. The dwarf insisted, so Lucille suggested doing it as an adventurer to avoid trouble with the church. He agreed cause he promised to help adventurers. The boss rushed to get elixir, and the receptionist told Lucille there were lots of high-level monsters lately, which was weird. Many people were hurt cause of this. Lucille didn't get why the dwarf was nervous. The girl said adventurers were like family to him. Lucille asked why the hurt folks didn't go to a clinic. She got mad and said they had no money. The dwarf came back with elixir, and they talked more. Lucille said he'd help heal the injured and only charge a silver coin. They celebrated cause Lucille would help, and there were lots of injured people from monster attacks. People at the bar saw Lucille and started insulting him cause they thought he'd make them slaves. But the dwarf stepped in and said he's the famous masochistic zombie healer from Maritoni. He'd help them for a silver coin. Lucille didn't like that nickname, but people calmed down and got excited cause he was famous. They even started chanting masochistic zombie. Lucille said he'd help but had 3 conditions. First, they had to pay a silver coin. Second, they should help if church folks had problems. Third, they had to stop calling him that name. He also asked for a better nickname, but they weren't very creative. Lucille healed them with magic, and they felt better and thanked him. After that, they tried to come up with a new nickname. They settled on Saint Weirdo, which everyone liked except Lucille. He thought adventurers were bad at giving nicknames. Lucille visited Catalia and explained he was late cause he said goodbye to the Valkyries. Many people came to say bye to him, which surprised Lumina. All the people Lucille healed cheered for him and called him Saint Weirdo. Lucille was shocked. Catalia asked if he was going back to the labyrinth and if he'd return at the usual time. Lucille said he'd stay longer, and Catalia got annoyed, saying it's dangerous. But he reassured her, mentioning he had his magic sack and plenty of food. She insisted he shouldn't overdo it and come back at least once a week. Lucille said his motto was not to die and left for the labyrinth. A few days later, he came back, surprising Catalia cause it had been a week. She had the items he asked from the Pope and a magical pillow for good rest inside the labyrinth. Catalia asked his plans for the day. Lucille said he'd rest and get food for his labyrinth trip. Then, he went to the guild. The dwarf had a barrel of elixir ready cause he remembered it was Saint Weirdo's day off. Lucille was surprised by his memory and asked why he always stayed in the kitchen. The dwarf liked it there. Lucille asked him to send a letter for him, and the boss agreed. Suddenly, some young adventurers interrupted them, calling Lucille and Saint Weirdo. The young adventurers asked Lucille if he could practice with them after their treatments. They were excited to show their skills. Lucille still didn't like the nickname but agreed. The guild leader said the young adventurers were eager to get stronger, which meant fewer deaths and failed missions. Lucille was happy to hear that. The dwarf said the young adventurers took on high-level tasks and did great. They beat strong monsters. Then, Elites, who's now rank A, arrived. He asked Lucille about the physical enhancement skill he taught him. Lucille said he's struggling and hasn't succeeded yet. Elites asked if they were still at level 1. Lucille explained he hadn't defeated any real monsters, just labyrinth illusions. Elites was super impressed cause Lucille came so far without leveling up. He had real talent. Then, the receptionist called him, and Lucille started treating people. He used spells to heal them, and they were thankful. Lucille took the chance and asked if anyone knew about the Valkyries and the Adventurers Guild in Maritoni. One person said they seemed fine, another mentioned some Templars died, and someone else said the whirlwind was out of control. Lucille was confused about the whirlwind, but no one explained. They just said he kidnaps people and forces them to train. Lucille realized it was Broad. They also told him Gulger went crazy, giving elixir to everyone and making new recipes. But there was more news. Lucille found out some guild receptionists were getting married. He was shocked and asked for details. They said rank of beastmen stole the receptionists' hearts. Lucille was desperate and asked which receptionists. They didn't know. He worried it might be Monica and Nana since they hadn't replied to his letters. Then, he went to the labyrinth and beat the level 30 boss. When he returned to Catalia's shop, she seemed worried. Lucille didn't know what to do, so he reassured her. He checked his card and had 426,549 points, the same he needed for a robe and 5 trips. Catalia suggested using the extra points to buy potions. Lucille agreed cause he used a lot of magic in battles. Catalia was surprised when Lucille told her he could use a spell he was too young for. She asked if he lied about his age, but he didn't. Lucille explained that when he first joined the guild, he was 15 and could only use heal. Then, Catalia wondered if he was taking something illegal, but Lucille said no, except for maybe the elixir, which didn't do much, theoretically. She decided to take him to confess his sins to the Pope, and Lucille saw a chance to find out about the drink he'd been having. The Pope was surprised he reached level 30, and noticed Lucille's magic power had grown a lot. Catalia showed the Pope a barrel of elixir, causing a commotion. She asked Lucille to stop drinking it, but he explained it wasn't poisonous and they served it at the Adventurers Guild. The Pope got curious and asked what it was called. They told him it's made from herbs, dragon's heart, and spiritual water. It's in pill form but is known as God's Lament because the liquid is nasty. Lucille admitted it tasted awful but said he still drank 3 cups a day to survive because it had no side effects. Lucille's reasons for drinking the elixir amazed Catalia and the Pope. The Pope changed the subject and asked what Lucille encountered in the dungeon. Lucille said there were 3 specters and 5 ghost knights, but his area of effect spell took them out. The entities were amazed he could use that spell at his age. The Pope commented that if Lucille kept it up, he'd become a sage someday. Then, he asked to see the items dropped by the monsters. Lucille handed them over, and the Pope realized they belonged to 3 girls, which caught Lucille's attention. The Pope said she'd send his reward with Catalia later. The next day, Catalia gave him a letter from the Pope, listing the side effects of God's Lament. Lucille read it and found it was a copy of the notes from the sage who created God's Lament. The sage explained it enhanced 3 basic needs like sleeping, eating, and clapping. The substance also protected against diseases, revived cells after death, and improved skill acquisition. Lucille learned it actually worked, contrary to what he thought before. The church didn't accept it due to its bad smell, but the sage gave the recipe to the guilds, hoping an adventurer would try it someday. Lucille realized the elixir enhanced 2 needs while sacrificing 1, clapping. He understood why Catalia felt sorry for him when she shared the information. After this discovery, Lucille set a new goal. When he left the labyrinth, he would finally clap once and for all. Lucille learned about the elixir's origin and side effects. He continued exploring dungeon levels 31 to 40, encountering various monsters. When he reached the boss room, he hesitated due to a bad feeling. Instead, he went to the Adventurers Guild to ask about the undead. As he approached the guild, a tearful little girl caught his attention. Lucille debated whether to speak to her, fearing a bad nickname. He invited her inside to talk to others. Inside, he was surprised to find Nana and Monica. They looked happy, but he didn't have time to ask why they were there. The adventurers needed Saint Weirdo's help with the wounded. While healing, Lucille told the receptionist about the girl at the entrance. He wondered why Nana and Monica were visiting, fearing it might be about their new marriages. After healing everyone, the receptionist told him to go with the girl to the lower districts right away. Nana, Monica, and the guildmaster decided to join. When they got there, Lucille noticed how miserable and deathly it smelled everywhere. As they walked, they met folks from Yenis City, all badly hurt from a thief attack. They couldn't afford clinic bills, so the little girl sought help from the adventurers. While they talked, an unconscious guy suddenly woke up and stabbed Lucille. It hurt bad, reminding him of his past death, but he didn't let it stop him. He used the pain to cast a spell, healing everyone, including himself, but it drained him hard. The girls rushed to check on him, and the guildmaster apologized for the surprise attack. Lucille, kind-hearted, thought the attacker acted out of instinct. Later, Lucille realized the attacker was the girl's dad. More people came, begging for help, but rules tied his hands. He did it as a kind deed, even making the water clean to stop sickness. He told them not to do it again and to stay clean to avoid illness. Thanks to his kindness, more people cared about Saint Weirdo now. In the evening, Lucille chatted with Nana and Monica. They worried when he got hurt and said he should be careful. This somehow made Lucille want to beat the level 40 boss. But they came to visit the capital before the weddings. Lucille worried some random guys beat him to clap those 2, but it wasn't bad news. They told him that Melina and Murnell were the ones getting married, and they hadn't received his letters. Turns out, Lucille didn't get their letters either. The guildmaster forgot to send them, busy partying after work. Lucille was mad at the dwarf, but elites showed up, saving him. Elites asked which girl was his girlfriend, and adventurers whispered about Lucille, and the girls right in front of them. Lucille told elites these 2 were why he became a healer, and he really liked them. Their support helped him survive Broad's tough training, which surprised everyone because Broad's training is known to be super hard. Lucille asked the girls how long they'd stay. They said about 3 days. He invited them to spend time with him, but their visit was mostly work, nothing fancy. To make up for it, the guild owner threw a party, and soon Nana and Monica said goodbye to Lucille. They were glad he was okay and encouraged him. Lucille promised to visit them someday. Later, he met the people he helped, even the guy who stabbed him. The man felt sorry and wanted to give his life for Lucille, but Lucille said he should live a good life now that he was saved. The man admired Saint Weirdo in the end. Lucille learned that the people wanted to create a healers guild in Yenis thanks to him. They got to talk to the Pope, and they were really grateful for his help. Lucille, being his usual humble self, kept saying it wasn't a big deal. But then, the little girl named Sheila hugged him, and he noticed she couldn't speak. Her dad explained she heard her voice a long time ago. So, Lucille knelt down, called her Sheila, and told her she was a hero for saving people. He gently patted her head and encouraged her not to give up despite her limitations. He even tried a spell called Extra Heal, although he wasn't a master, to help her voice a bit. Later, Lucille talked to Lumina about his plan to fight the level 40 dungeon boss, even though he had doubts. Lumina called him a bit of a coward, but in a friendly way. She wanted to practice with him to see how much he'd improved in the city over a year. Lucille agreed because he also wanted to test his strength. The fight started, and Lumina attacked full force, making Lucille defend himself with his shield. She got tricky, even throwing a knife at him, but he dodged. Lumina got even more excited. Despite Lucille's best efforts, he couldn't beat her. But Lumina said he improved more than anyone she'd seen in a while. She advised him not to face foes as strong as the level 40 boss yet. Instead of focusing on her advice, Lucille noticed how Lumina talked. She was usually serious and polite, but this time, she relaxed a bit and talked more casually. Lucille teased her, saying she was cuter that way, especially when talking about him. After training, Lucille felt confident to face the level 40 boss. He went to tell Catalia, who gave him a letter from Lumina meant for this moment. Facing the boss, Lucille remembered the letter. Lumina warned him about the boss, a talented guy with a lance and sword. During the battle, Lucille tried a purification spell, but the boss ignored it. As the boss was almost sending him flying, Lucille pulled out barrels of elixir to cover his smell, even though it was so bad that even a skeleton wouldn't like it. This allowed him to keep trying to beat the boss for a whole week. During that time, Lucille had to sleep and eat next to that stinky smell. It was that or die, and he wasn't giving the game another chance. Finally, he realized the labyrinth was real, not a fake game. He used to think it was a safe simulation since he never leveled up despite fighting monsters daily. But now he knew if they killed him, it was game over, so he had to be super careful. Lucille attacked the boss again with confidence and strength. He had fought him so many times that he knew all his moves. He had spent 6 months thinking about how to beat him as a solo player. Lucille analyzed the attacks of opponents with 2 weapons perfectly and struck where they couldn't defend. He remembered his master's advice about aiming for the head. With the strength of everyone who supported him, he decapitated the monster, and it dropped a book. After finishing the job, he tried to leave, but the door wouldn't open. He tried everything, but it stayed shut. Lucille didn't give in to despair again. He tied a barrel of elixir to himself, the best monster repellent, and ran down to level 50. Along the way, he found treasures and easily descended the stairs. Everything seemed super easy, as if luck was finally on his side. And indeed, it was, because he reached level 50 without a scratch. Because of that, Lucille spent the next 6 months inside the dungeon. He was in front of the 50th floor boss room, eating his last meal. He tries to prepare for his fight by learning one spell before going in. Upon stepping inside, he sees faces made of miasma turn into a huge green monster. He tries to use his spell, but the boss tries to punch him. The boss gets behind and he notices dark magic. Luckily, he just learned the right spell against it. The spell repels the boss but consumes too much of his mana, and he will eventually run out of potions and die here. He decides to combine the last spell with another one to imprison the boss in a light. The boss tries to charge at him, but Lucille manages to avoid it. As the boss is defeated, he notices a man's face. He wonders if the monsters or bosses he's been fighting against were all people like him. He picks up the drops when a magical door suddenly appears behind him. He steps inside and follows the stairs to another floor. He finds an undead dragon there and thinks could try to talk to it, but he decides to use his spell to purify it instead. The dragon cries in pain, losing the undead status. Lucille thinks he defeated it, but the dragon is still alive. The dragon then mentions that Lucille defeated him in one hit, and tells that he can take everything as a reward. Lucille thinks the dragon is trying to trick him. But the dragon, there's no more evil on this floor, and the labyrinth will vanish once the magic stone is taken away. Lucille questions the goal of the labyrinth, and the dragon explains that it's to seal dragons. After a long explanation, the dragon reveals that he likes Lucille, all because he didn't focus his attention on the treasure. So, he decides to give him his protection. Lucille is worried and tries to reject it, but the dragon explains it will make it harder for him to die. You know, Lucille, he would love that, so he accepts. The dragon then mentions that demons will grow in might from now on, and asks Lucille to save as many people as he can. The dragon gives Lucille his blessing and asks Lucille to save other dragons sealed inside dungeons. The dragon turns into a huge skeleton and Lucille gets several titles. He gets the blessing of the healer god, Dragon Slayer, and the protection of the holy dragon, which gives him the ability to sense where other dragons are located. He quickly collects the treasure and gets teleported to the labyrinth entrance. He visits Catalia, who immediately hugs him in relief that he's safe. She wants to know what happened, but there is something more important to do. The adventurers created a huge commotion in front of the church, thinking they imprisoned Lucille for the last 6 months. Upon reaching the entrance, he meets Broad, Gulger, and Galba. Broad starts punishing him for no reason, and Lucille asks why they're there. They all ask where he has been. He explains after having a meal and returns to his normal day, healing random people on the street and training with Broad, just to get defeated in 1 second. But as always, he never gives up, ever after losing some teeth. After a massive beating, Broad says that Lucille is still weak. Gulger mentions that Lucille may never return to their guild if Broad continues to treat him like that. Broad gets scared, but Galba joins in, mentioning he could train Lucille instead because his fighting style is more suitable for him. Broad confronts Galba, telling him to no steal his apprentice. Galba then tells Lucille to bring a girlfriend or two when he visits them. Hearing those words, Lucille asks Broad to deliver some letters to Nana and Monica. Broad then gets curious and asks which of the 2 girls Lucille wants to date. Of course, Lucille's a good man of culture, and he wants both. But this is time for the trio to depart, leaving Lucille in tears for the farewell. He returns to the church to report to the Pope and apologizes for making her worried. The Pope explains they would normally dispatch a rescue party, but some members opposed it. So, in the end, only Lumina's Valkyries went into the labyrinth to save him, but they had to give up on the 31st floor. The Pope asks for an explanation, and Lucille tells her that he defeated the boss of the last floor. She asks if he had any issues when returning back, but Lucille refuses to answer. He will only continue his report on the presence of the Pope, Catalia, and Lumina. The rest of the church members start complaining, but the Pope orders them to leave the room. Lucille goes more in detail with his report, explaining his meeting with the dragon and revealing their conversation. The dragon told him that his kind was sealed in labyrinths by the Dark God's curse, and that he needed Lucille to free them. The dragon also told him the next hero would only appear in 40 years, but by that time, the demons will become stronger, and the hero won't be able to defeat the demon lord. After the report, Lucille asks why his level is still 1. The Pope orders him to open his status window and asks him if a level 1 should have his job, skills, and stats. He's still confused, but the Pope gives him a document regarding Substance X. Turns out that if he keeps drinking it, his stats will increase, but he won't be able to level up. He gets disappointed, but the Pope tells him to cheer up because they will celebrate his victory over the labyrinth in 1 week. During the celebration, the Pope praises Lucille and awards him the rank of S-class healer and the status of a bishop. Not only that, but he also has authority to reject orders from anyone in the church, except for the Pope. During Lucille's speech, he mentions that literally outranked them all in just 4 years. He then explains how the healer's greedy behavior is ruining their reputation. Therefore, he will create regulations to give a fair price to healing fees. This way, healers will now work to increase their reputation, not their pockets. Watch this next video. See you on the next one.